Yeah, I don't know if anybody watches these videos in this class, but one of the things I said in our class was that in giving you Oscar Wilde's The Soul of Man Under Socialism, or an excerpt from it, and this excerpt from Ortega y Gasset's The Revolt of the Masses, I'm not trolling you. I'm not trying to bait you or um, intentionally outrage you, but I think there's a flavor to these texts that might be outrageous. Certainly don't expect many people to like these texts. I think if I had read them when I was your age, I would dislike them intensely. I might actually be outraged by them. I think it's an interesting thing reading something later in life. In any case, the thing that I suppose links them, I would say, is a kind of oh gosh, how would you characterize it? A kind of a democratic elitism. Both Wilde and Ortega were they believed in liberalism, I think, and they believed to some degree in democracy. Although you can see that Ortega sees democracy, at least in its modern form, as lethal. But I think they both believe in free societies. I think they believe in some form of at least political equality. But they also have very rather frank and perhaps negative things to say about Wilde about what the effects on people are of being poor, and Ortega what it means to be part of the mass or the masses. But I think that both of them have nuanced positions. But both of them say things I think we might find offensive. But I think Wilde is definitely motivated by a social consciousness in his advocacy of socialism. That he thinks that people are destroyed by capitalism and that he wants that to stop. That's, I think, the biggest concern he has now. Maybe what he says about what poverty and all that goes along with it, um, lack of education, lack of time to develop yourself, lack of the acquisition of culture. Maybe some of the things he says are very harsh. Maybe we have every reason to object to them, but I think we should at least give him his airing. Ortega, I think, is more clearly there's anxiety about modern democracies where the masses are essentially in power. He calls that in the beginning here a crisis. He begins by saying there is one fact, which, whether for good or ill, is of utmost importance in the public life of Europe at the present moment. And this is a very European, as opposed to American, way of thinking of these things. This fact is the accession of the masses to complete social power. As the masses, by definition, neither should nor can direct their own personal existence, and still less rule society in general, this fact means that actually Europe is suffering from the greatest crisis that can afflict peoples, nations, and civilization. That's the message there. That we live in a mass society. We live in a society where people who formerly were in the background are now in the foreground. Those people are the great masses of people. As opposed to whom? Well, I think as opposed to people that he calls the qualified minorities. And when Ortega says minorities, he doesn't mean ethnic minorities, religious or racial minorities. He means minorities as in people who have special education and skills or special status. Doctors are minorities. People with PhDs are minorities. People who know how to build bridges are minorities. People who um, have a comprehensive grasp of history are minorities. Priests and rabbis are minorities. That sort of thing. And if he has one point, it's that those people more or less used to be acknowledged as the leaders in society, both political and, as he says here, cultural too. At the end of the first paragraph, he says, public life is not solely political, but equally and even primarily intellectual, moral, economic, religious. It comprises all our collective habits, including our fashions both of dress and of amusement. So he has a wider idea of what class leadership means than just political or economic leadership. It's also cultural leadership, the kind of amusements we have, the kind of books we read or don't read, the kind of dramas that we enjoy watching, the kind of the style and flavor of our religious practices. And all these things matter. And his point is that the so-called qualified minorities that used to be the leaders in this way have lost their leadership position, and now it's run by the masses. Well, what's so bad about that? That's what we have to ask him. What is so bad about that? One of the things we should acknowledge is that it's not so much the masses that he thinks are bad, it's the mass person. Now that, what does that mean? This is, I guess, on page 2, right here, he says the concept of the multitude is quantitative and visual. Without changing its nature, let us translate it into terms of sociology. We then meet with the notion of the social mass. Society is always a dynamic unity of two component factors, minorities and masses. The minorities are individuals or groups of individuals which are especially qualified. You see, don't think that he uses minorities in the same way that we may in contemporary social and political discourse in America, right? Minorities for him are individuals or groups of individuals which are specially qualified. The mass is the assemblage of persons not specially qualified. By masses, then, is not to be understood solely or mainly the working masses. The mass is the average man. And in this way, what was mere quantity, the multitude, is converted into a qualitative determination, like an element of somebody's character, to be, quote, mass. What does it mean? What does he mean by this quality? Individuals can be like a mass individual. Simply this: by means of the latter, we understand the genesis of the former. It is evident to the verge of platitude that the normal formation of a multitude implies the coincidence of desires, ideas, ways of life in the individuals who cultivate it. Like, what is it to be mass? It's to embody everything that everyone else does, or to want to, at least. He explains this better on page 3 here. Strictly speaking, the mass, as a psychological fact, can be defined without waiting for individuals to appear in mass formation. In the presence of one individual, we can decide whether he is mass or not. The mass is all that which sets no value on itself, good or ill, based on specific grounds, but which feels itself just like everybody and nevertheless is not concerned about it. In fact, quite happy to feel itself as one with everybody else. Imagine a humble-minded man who, having tried to estimate his own worth on specific grounds, asking himself if he has any talent for this or that, if he excels in any direction, realizes that he possesses no quality of excellence. Such a man will feel that he is mediocre and commonplace, ill-gifted, but will not feel himself as mass. That is, if you sort of coldly evaluate your character and your accomplishments and you decide that you're mediocre, that doesn't mean you're mass, because your very awareness of that means you're not mass. To be mass is to be comfortable being inert and average and mediocre, right? That's the thing, right? So to be mass is to just feel completely okay with yourself. And aren't we supposed to? Well, I mean, Ortega says, no, you're not supposed to feel completely okay with yourself, right? You're supposed to have aspirations to be better, right? To improve yourself, to be better than you are. And the whole point of being mass is that you have no such consciousness of your shortcomings. You feel like you're absolutely okay because you're like everyone else, right? And so I think that's the big, I'd have to say that is the big point he's making about what it means to be mass. It's not that you're lower class socially or economically. It's rather that you embody a kind of an inertia where you're not aware of your own shortcomings and you have no hopes for yourself. You have no hopes for improving yourself. You just assume that everything about you is okay. Uh, and why does he consider this a disaster? Because now he's saying that those are the kind of people who are running the show with no particular qualifications, who think that they're qualified, but really aren't. Now, whether that's true, whether that's really a crisis, or whether that's just a sort of pathetic elitism, that's for you to decide. I don't know.